Hello, Art One, Digital and Studio, and today we are going to talk about the elements of art. Once you reach the second level of classes here, we're going to talk about the principles of art or principles of design. So the elements of art are really the building blocks, or they're the ingredients of art. Anytime we look at a visual piece of art, they've got these things in some capacity, some combination. And I like to think of the elements of art as like the alphabet that every visual thing is built on. Just as all the words, the conversations, the books, the movie dialogue within our language is all made up of letters. These elements of art are like the alphabet that we use when we're looking at visual stuff, whether we're looking at a painting or a sculpture or an advertisement or that sweet picture on Instagram. So the elements of art are really the building blocks or the ingredients that we use to create art with. First one we're going to talk about is value. Value is the lightness or the darkness of something. Oftentimes when we think about value, we're thinking about like financial value, but in art, value is referring to the lightness or darkness. So we can have value drawings that are just solely black or white. We can also have value within color. So value is the lightness or darkness of a color. Within photography particularly, we can talk about high and low contrast within value. Contrast is a word that we're going to use over and over and over and over again because we want to build pieces with good amounts of value contrast. We want to have that nice range where we've got those really, really crisp whites, but then also really, really dark darks. And whether we're working with color or not, we want both high and low contrast within, or we want high contrast within our artwork more often than not. And value can be used entirely on its own to create these works of art, just like this piece here by Picasso. The second element of art we're going to talk about is line. And line is a mark with length and direction. So it's a continuous mark made on a surface by a moving point. Paul Klee once said that a line is a dot that went for a walk. And so a line is really a mark with length and direction. Lines can be thick, thin, wiggly, zigzaggy, but any continuous mark made on the surface by a moving point. Third one up is form. And form has kind of two definitions depending on how we're looking at this. Form can be a three-dimensional object. So in these two examples, that sculpture on the left is a form. But in two-dimensional art, a form is something that appears three-dimensional. So if you look, or you think in your head like a rectangular prism or a sphere are both forms because they look three-dimensional. For an example, a triangle is a two-dimensional shape, but a pyramid becomes a three-dimensional form. Fourth element here is space. Space is the distance or area between, around, above, below, or within things. So paintings can have that sense of visual space. And we can also, such as the foreground, middle ground, background. I'll move my face out of the way there. But then we can also have positive and negative space. So in the photograph on the right there, the painting on the right, we're looking at that flower having that filling that positive space, and the negative space is that black empty space around it. Next element is color. We're going to talk more about this next week. But color consists of three things. There's the hue, which is just another fancy word for the color itself. There's the brightness to it. So colors can be brighter or duller. And then there's the value of that color, or that light to dark. Sixth element is texture. Two definitions. The texture is really the surface quality or the feel of an object. It can be smooth, rough, soft, etc., etc. You can have actual textures. So if we were looking at like an actual object, we can look and see the texture of that object. Or we can talk about the texture of an implied texture within a two-dimensional piece of art, something that is made to look like something else. So in this, woodcut here, we have a lot of texture going on with how Cecil Buller made those marks on that artwork. And then shape deals also with form, but shape is an enclosed area defined and determined by the other elements of art. So shapes can be determined by color, shapes can be determined by other shapes, shapes can be determined simply by line, but it's an enclosed two-dimensional area. So back to our form conversation, if we have a circle is a two-dimensional shape, but if we pull that and we make it into a sphere or something like a ball, that becomes a three-dimensional form. So shape is two-dimensional. This painting is depicting all these shapes that kind of oscillate between shape and form. As we look here, when we start looking more three-dimensional, those shapes become forms. But as we look at these little bins of blueberries, those just look like this big shape. And the last one, Mr. G and I always like to agree and throw this in, but typography, we call it like our eighth element of art. Typography is the visual representation of language. So whether you're referring to any text, regardless of the font or language, it's going to fall into that realm of typography. And so typography is a really good way of visually representing speech or any form of language. So those are our elements of art. We are going to be creating an infographic off of that, and there will be another video following up with some directions on that.